Happy September 11th, everyone. I've come to tell you that the United States of America deserved the attack of 9/11. No, that isn't to say that the innocent people who died that day deserved it at an individual level. That is not what I'm arguing. However, it is important to note that all of the innocent American blood falls chiefly and primarily on the hands of the United States government for the September 11th attack. For it was the US government who trained Osama bin Laden, along with many of the key individuals involved in the attack, how to hijack airplanes and sneak weapons onto a flight, getting past airplane security and so on. It's the United States who funded and supported right-wing extremist groups and radical jihadists for decades all across the Middle East. It is the United States government who propped up Saddam Hussein and took a blind eye to his crimes. Point being that the blood of all those 9/11 victims are on the hands of the United States government, because the attack would have never happened if it wasn't for United States meddling in the first place. There's an attack on United States soil, and so the government's response to said attack is to proceed and invade and declare war on like 6 countries whom had absolutely fuck all to do with September 11th, while continuing to remain close bosom buddies with the nation whom arguably was, i.e. Saudi Arabia. It is the United States government that is constantly antagonizing the rest of the world by destabilizing vast continental regions of it, overthrowing democratic governments and coups, bombing and invading countries that have never attacked us in hostile wars of aggression, deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure and utilizing tactics designed to inflict the maximum amount of pain possible on the given region, strangling entire economies with ruthless sanctions designed to inflict deliberate immiseration upon millions of innocent people, backing fascist dictatorships, and enabling genocide after genocide by the decades, if not directly participating in the genocide themselves. And so in the wake of this, it shouldn't be a surprise when the victims of your forever wars and constant bombing and ruining of the rest of the world on a for-profit basis eventually muster the resolve and resources necessary to retaliate on your home soil. As it stands right now, the maximum death toll in Gaza is potentially at a figure north of 200,000. The 40 to 50k death toll figure that is reported by Palestine are merely the confirmed deaths that we know about. The actual figure is likely much higher and probably closer to 200k. The State of Israel began its genocide of Gaza on October 7th as of last year under the tenure of President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. And there is no reason to think that it simply will not continue under the Kamala Harris presidency. This is an ongoing genocide that has the bipartisan support of both the Republicans and Democrats alike. As stated before, I do not believe any of the individual people who died on 9/11 should be directly held to account for the actions and policy blunders of the United States government, nor do I believe that said people deserve to die. The victims of 9/11 are ultimately victims of the US empire. Having said that, there are still a number of toxic tendencies within US politics that exist amongst the general population that are absolutely worth calling out. For one, Americans act like the lives of their own are worth so much more than the lives of people abroad. I don't see any national holidays commemorating the Iraqi victims of America's invasion, of which there is about 1 million. I don't see any holidays commemorating the millions of victims in the Vietnam War, a country which still experiences tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of infants born with birth defects every year to this very day as a direct consequence of the US military's use of chemical warfare. Best case scenario is that we get the glorification of the troops. All this concern for the mental health of US soldiers committing these atrocities, whom we coddle the hell out of, while at the same time moving with a flagrant disregard for the actual victims of these travesties. What makes American lives worth so much more than the lives of people across the globe? The nation of Palestine is currently experiencing their own 9/11 multiplied by about 100, being inflicted upon them by a fascist ethno-state that is directly backed and enabled by the United States government. And while the American public itself is not directly to blame for the actions of its government, I do believe that the average American does share a modicum of blame for the situation we are currently in. After all, it is the average American whom actively takes a blind eye to the actions committed by their own government, maintaining a collective mindset of passivity and willful ignorance, It is the average American who passively accepts increasingly worsening living conditions. It is the average American who turns out by the tens of millions every 4 or so years to vote for the politicians and voice active support for one establishment party or another, and then rationalizes it to themselves later. The fact of the matter is that both of these parties are bloodthirsty, pro-fascist, pro-genocide, warmongering parties. And yet all they need to do in order to get Americans to shill out and vote for them is to promise petty concessions and scraps, which 95% of the time neither of these parties ever deliver on. Americans will believe whatever empty promises are made by the corporate shills in Washington, and in return they will turn out for them and vote unconditionally. The point being is that at what point do Americans not share some degree of collective accountability for their passivity and complete unwillingness to exercise what little political leverage that they possess at an individual level to take a stand for what is right? After a certain point, I do think the American public does share some of the blame, at the very least implicitly and indirectly. And if this comes off as uncharitable of an interpretation to some, hear me out. I understand that Americans are some of the most manipulated and propagandized people on Earth, and that corporations have been filling people's heads full of bullshit across the media and airwaves for decades. But we're living in the information age now. All of this information is public knowledge and available at the press of a button. Hell, you don't even need to do your own research. There are dozens of YouTube channels, such as my own, devoted to doing all of this hard work for you. People don't have an excuse for not knowing better anymore. If you even care a modicum about the world and its issues, you should be at the very least willing to do some basic research and get an idea of how unjustifiably fucking horrible the US government is, how it is a menace and a blight upon mankind, and how it must be opposed and combated at all costs for the sake of human life and progress. If the US public wanted it badly enough, they could bring an end to the military-industrial complex. They could bring an end to the forever wars, bring the troops home, and bring an end to the genocide of Gaza. Instead, year after year, they willingly and consciously surrender off their own political responsibility and agency onto politicians that ultimately do not serve them. And to the extent that people even are politically involved, the vast majority of them pledge their unconditional support to either the Republican or Democratic Party. All these parties need to do is pay lip service to free healthcare, pay lip service to student loan forgiveness, or pay lip service to legalizing marijuana, and people will completely ignore the Gaza genocide that is being backed by both parties and turn out in droves to support these politicians. When what Americans should be doing right now is volunteering what little time and resources that they have to building up a working class alternative, voting and supporting the third-party alternative, and turning out to protests, strikes, and acts of civil disobedience whenever they can. And contrary to all of the defeatist propaganda and democratic partisan gaslighting, a third party can win an election within the United States, even with all of the present anti-democratic levers and fail-safes in place, such as the Electoral College, that exist to ensure the preservation of the two-party duopoly. If there is any recent phenomenon that I can recall that directly proves the validity of a third-party alternative, it is none other than the Sanders campaigns of 2016 and 2020. Of course, Bernie Sanders was running on the Democratic Party ticket. The emergence of his campaign was truly a magnificent sight to behold. Sanders inspired excitement and enthusiasm amongst the general population, the likes of which hasn't been seen for decades. During his campaign, young working people spontaneously turned out in droves not only to vote for him, but to donate to him, to canvass for him, and to volunteer their individual time and effort to his campaign. You don't see this kind of young inspiration emerging from the likes of other politicians. They may have all of the money, but they lack genuine ecstatic democratic support from the grassroots. Now, ultimately, the movement was betrayed by Bernie Sanders, and Sanders ultimately ended up burning all of the people that he said he would fight for. The point is that a third party can be built, it can be made, and it can be done. If you build it, they will come. By the end of 2016, Sanders could have taken his $100+ million in small campaign contributions and funneled it into the Green Party, running on the Green ticket during the general election. Even if he didn't win, he would have legitimized the Green Party as a real alternative, and that would have established lasting working-class presence within the sphere of US politics over time. Instead, Sanders and much of the American population continue to fall prey to the perpetual Democratic partisan gaslighting every 4 years. And again, it is under the tenure of the Democrats that the ongoing atrocities in Gaza are currently transpiring. The American public should know better by now. We should know that no amount of tiny minuscule scraps or empty promises for concessions is worth throwing our weight behind one genocide-enabling party or another. And the fact that so many Americans are so willing to choose to stick their heads in the sand so long as they get theirs is despicable. It's the politics of Scrooge McDuck. All I care about is what affects me personally. Screw the rest of the world. Screw higher social responsibility. Screw it all. Because I got my tax breaks or my legal marijuana or whatever. Evil only prevails when good men fail to act, and after a certain point, the American public's aloofness, passivity, and general apathy can be identified as part of the problem. So let me be clear. The actions which working Americans should be taken to oppose the empire must go well above and beyond merely voting or canvassing for a third party. It goes well above and beyond the necessity of protesting or showing up to acts of resistance. Yes, these things are important, but it goes well above and beyond those things. The type of truly revolutionary actions which American workers must eventually involve themselves in ultimately includes a set of actions that I cannot describe or advocate on this channel without this video getting pulled due to violation of community guidelines. Having said that, if you are a subscriber of mine, if you do digest this channel and its content, that means that on some level, you are a member of the most advanced and class-conscious sections of the proletariat. And for that reason in particular, you share a special obligation in the broader movement. You are consciously aware of these things. You know it must be done. And so you have no excuse to not at the very least devote a small modicum of time or a fraction of your resources to building up the socialist alternative and engaging in class struggle within your local community. In whatever capacity that you can, you must participate in class struggle. If you only have an hour or two worth of spare time per week to participate in grassroots organizing, that's fine. It's better than nothing. I understand that we're all strung up for time and cash right now. Just do the best you can and work with what you got. And remember that a communist who doesn't engage in real-world practice is in fact not a communist at all.